the camera.
I better turn my lights before I disturb everybody, because it's the sun goes down and then I'm in the dark.
Okay, so can everybody see my big screen now? Everybody see
Yep.
the questions?
Yeah, it's up.
Yes.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, so we're in the middle of continuing our questions from chapter 2. We had 3 left, and we're going to talk a bit about these 3 questions. So, question number 13. How is quality defined? And I think that I was speaking, was it you, Yannick, that I was talking with today as Bear was talking, and he was talking about the quality of the light today. So the question is, the still magnetic light universe of God's knowing, which is invisible, unchanging, unconditional, and unmeasurable. So I actually pulled up a little diagram from Walter Russell showing the stillness of the mind here. And within that, it's kind of showing these qualities that are moving around in the vortex. And you got the waves going through. So does anybody have any comments on the still magnetic light universe of God's knowing, which is invisible, unchanging, unconditional, and unmeasurable? Does unmeasurable mean that it's so immense that it can't be measured, or that any part of it can't be measured?
I would personally say unmeasurable in the sense that it cannot be measured, because the still magnetic light of God is not part of the, I mean, it is part of the electrical side of things, but it's that stillness which is the fulcrum of those 2 electrical conditions. Therefore, once it reaches that point of stillness, then it is immeasurable at that point, if that makes sense. So if we're looking at that chart that you're showing now, where it says mind, there it's pure stillness, there's nothing going on. But as we see the spirals coming from it, that's the electrical signal which he calls thinking mind, which is the 2 pressure conditions of centripetal and centrifugal. Yeah, you know what I mean. I hope that makes sense.
And look at these qualities that we're speaking about here, right? Love, how can love be measured, right? How can idea be measured, right? How can energy be measured? How can beauty be measured? Concept, some of these qualities, right? How can they be measured?
I guess even with energy, it's what are we defining as energy? Are we defining electricity as energy, or are we defining mind as being pure energy? If that makes sense.
Well, in biogeometry, Dr. Karim says there's 2 elements and 2 sides to all this, right? There's the quality, which can't be measured, and then there's the quantity that can. So I can have 3 red roses. I can say I can measure that there's 3 beautiful roses, but can I measure there is 3 more beautiful than 1?
There's a similar discussion, I was listening to a Thunderbolts electric universe discussion about the makeup of our galactic universe and thinking about the energy there. And there was kind of a comparison to, yes, there's a quantity that we kind of think of in terms of frequency, but there's a quality that we don't have an ability to measure. And that's something that comes from both individuals. You know, what is the quality of somebody's resonant energy, and that probably also exists out in the cosmos. Yeah, it's the same topic basically, and it's focused on energy specifically. But all of these things, they seem like they have quantitative. There's maybe things that you could quantify in some ways, but there's a what is quality? Yeah.
Well, again, you were just asking that question about the solar panels previously, right? And I said you can use an electrosmog meter where you actually check the quantity. So you're checking the force of the wave of, say, what's coming off of that panel. The quality would be if that is a detrimental wave or not. And that's what you use the biogeometry and the pendulums for. So biogeometry doesn't really check quantity, it checks quality. And we may not need to transmute the quantity of the wave if we can transmute the quality of the wave. If we can transmute a detrimental wave to a beneficial wave or neutral wave, we don't have to worry about the quantity, right? So that's what I picked up from biogeometry. And so those two aspects, which quality is not and you can't measure it empirically. It's really a judgment. It's really the mind of God that says this is more beautiful than that, or this, I love you more than I love her or him or whatever. That's not really a measurable. That's really more of a quality.
I liked in that sentence unchanging and unconditional, especially that unconditional thing, because I mean you're showing here love, or so it's like it's shining on us all the time, that we realize it or not. I just like that part, unchanging and unconditional. It makes you feel good. That we're looked after, if you like.
Especially when you get into things like truth, that it's unconditional and unchanging. So it's always the same, regardless of condition, external condition.
Yeah.
As far as quality, where would feeling come into play here?
Well, I would think that within feeling of quality, love, is love a feeling, or is love, some of these things, again, we're not covering them all here. But is inspiration a feeling, How would you characterize that, Susan?
Well, it's almost like inspiration can almost come like a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were talking about the example of the solar panel, you were talking one measurement was quantity, but those that are sensitive can feel the quality if you were saying like if it's not a good energy.
Mm-hmm.
So it just brought to my mind, how does feeling come into play?
Well, we also, if you can see here, you have intuition, right? And that's really, that's the intuitive mind. And what we've talked a bit about is how do we separate the thinking mind, which is really that electrosmog meter, from the intuitive mind, which is the quantity and the things that you're speaking about now.
It's kind of separating the two sides of what you mean by feeling. Are you, feeling in terms of an intuition, or feeling in terms of the sensation?
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you can't measure the intuition side, or if you're talking about feeling from an intuitive point, it's an immeasurable thing, whereas the feeling in terms of sensation is an electrical condition, which you probably could quantify if you were hooked up to sensitive enough instruments, but it still doesn't define the quality for which you perceive something, if that makes sense.
I've been thinking about this idea that if we are electric beings, this that our goosebumps are this. I think the kind of I don't think that they are just a mechanism to increase the vibration of our body to bring heat. They are, I think, our kind of connection out to the electrical fabric of the universe that we live in. And did I mention this in a previous? I don't know if I apologize if I've said this already, but it relates to what we're talking about here, I think, in a new way for me. That I've asked a lot of people, like, what do you think? Why do you think goosebumps happen? And it's kind of interesting to see where people go first. And some people go right to the. I thought more people were going to think about how it's a way that you shiver and to warm yourself up, but most people are attracted to the positive qualities of the inspirational side of goosebumps. When you hear something, some people have said to me, when I hear something that's true, or when I hear a great song and I'm really, or if I'm inspired by something. One friend told me that when he sees something in perfect balance, he gets that kind of goosebump. But then other people have noted that you can get them in some cases when you're frightened or scared. So that so like the actual like physical lift that comes from the sensing could be the quantity aspect of this, but then all of these other qualities that could cause it to happen, you can't really infer from the way the goosebumps happen what that might be.
Might be a little off topic, but what you're saying made me think about how hair can be like an antenna.
Oh yeah, I do think that that's what it is. And actually, to go back to the other part of why you do get goosebumps, it does help warm you up when you're cold. And I think what is actually happening there is that our antenna are reaching out and drawing energy from the world around us, because we've actually gotten cold, and maybe not just physically cold. It could be like there's many aspects to cold, but we're actually saying like, hey, I need some more energy, bring it in. So
but just going by what what the diagram is showing, so you have mind, and then you have the other things around it, love, vision, intuition, etc. And then as you notice, it will spiral into the sensations part, or the body parts of that diagram. So there's always something preceding that before the sensations arrive. So there's always something that precedes that before you get the sensation of a goosebump, if that makes sense. Something happens within you and your body reacts with sensations or to react to that thing that you're receiving. So the quality, as we're talking about, is always preceded. It always precedes the quantity of those sensations, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and actually you made me realize another thing in this diagram, that if I'm reading this diagram right, the sensations are on the outer part. And by the time these qualities spiral out to get to the outermost ring where the sensations occur, they get so interwoven with the other ones that it's almost impossible to differentiate them. But when they're closer into the middle, I don't know if I'm reading something that's not in this diagram, but you could say that they're more distinguishable as qualities, but when they're further away from sensation, and that by the time they get to the physical sensation, they become indistinguishable.
It's a good point.
So the question is, where do we live? Do we live in the inspirations, or do we live in the sensations, or do we live in the body? And what is our mind doing to parse or to, calculate for us what's going on? So once we get into that thinking mind, we sometimes may get out of this inspirational mind and begin to try to figure out what's going on. All right, great conversation. Let's go on. Let's go back to the questions here. Let me see here. There we go. All right, is everybody good with 13? We move on?
Yep.
What words are used to describe quality? Mind, consciousness, desire, truth, knowledge. So that goes back to the diagram we just saw.
Mhm.
Any more discussions on that now that we've actually seen the diagram and seen the answers to the next question? All right, let's go back to our questions. What is the God quality divided into? So these qualities that we've talked about, right? We've expressed what they are. We've talked how it's defined. Number 13 was how is it defined, right? Number 14 is how is it described? And number 15 is what is it divided into? On page 18, it says 2 pairs of opposite conditioned light pressures and then into countless octave wave units of light pressures and set in opposite directional motion to create the illusion of sequence, change, and time. That's a mouthful. Let's go to this little, I wish the slide was clearer, but I can't find any that are like pristine, but as we can see here, we can see the wave coming through. We have the radiation and gravitation and so on, and positive and negative. Then we have the octaves. They're kind of broken into. So what does anybody have to say about that question? Does anybody have anything to say about the oh, that's the next slide. Let's go back here. Oh, I'm going forward. Let's go back to the question. Shoot.
Yeah.
The question is 2 pairs of opposite conditioned light pressures and then into countless octave wave units of light pressure and set in opposite should be directional motion to create the illusion of sequence, change, and time.
It's that fractal, isn't it? It's that fractal pattern we see in nature, where it continually gets divided and divided and divided for infinity, basically. Yeah, I mean, the diagram pretty much explains it when you can sit there and look and analyze it, but yeah.
It says 2 pairs of opposite.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have the positive and we have the negative, right?
Okay. What about this negation thing that we learned at the very beginning? I'm just trying to kind of relate to, well, maybe that was something to do with Santos. I can't remember. Maybe it was something I read, and it says condition. that's because of the thinking mind?
If we look at where it says gravitation dominates, so that's the top half of or top quarter of the wave there.
Okay.
It says gravitation dominates. I don't know if you remember me talking about how us growing up, even from birth to death, we have gravitation which dominates. So life dominates up to a certain point or halfway through our life, and then the degenerative state kicks in and becomes more dominant, and we then slowly die off. So we, from birth, we grow, and then once we hit the midpoint, we then start to radiate outwardly to die, basically. So then we start to go down and down and down, and then we reach the point of the fulcrum, which is the 0 point there, I believe, on that diagram, and then the cycle continues again to gravitation, to radiation, and so it's mirrored for eternity, essentially. That sequence of events.
Mhm.
So
And
is
then obviously there's the what Walter describes as the octave wave. So in between, there's different points to which things happen, and it also, if you look at the elements table, it's also divided into octaves. So it's essentially a musical scale that's happening in the universe. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
no, that's okay. So is the no, it's great. We
Yeah.
have to repeat to get this. Like the condition part, would it be to do with the radiation and gravitation then?
The condition part.
In that sentence about the condition, I mean, we talked about the opposite. That was the positive and negative. See, condition.
Yeah, it just means that those two pairs have,
properties,
yes,
maybe.
yeah,
Gravitational and radiation.
Okay.
Mm.
Well,
The
just,
conditions of the properties.
just
Yeah.
you use the word condition, so I'm just.
So what they do is they create the illusion. So the illusion of sequence
Mhm.
and time. So he's saying that sequence, change, and time is an illusion that is created by these two pairs of opposite condition light pressures as they break into countless octave waves.
So that's how, not that it's in that sentence, but that's how it travels then, eh?
That's how we perceive travel,
Yeah, okay.
right? We've learned that there is travel
know.
illusion, right?
Mhm.
And as he says here, the illusion.
Right.
But because our minds can't grasp and see the wholeness of everything occurring at once, in order for our minds to understand, we create this illusion of sequence, change, and time. Any comments on that?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, really. It's an optical illusion. As you say, we're only ever seeing one half of the cycle at any one time. We never see the whole thing, as you said, and that's our perception of what we see as motion.
I think Bear actually discussed this in one of the alpha casts where he had his hand and he was moving it and said that's really just.
Yeah, I know.
You remember that?
Yeah, I was like, oof.
I don't recall that one. What did he say about that?
He was just talking to somebody and they was kind of blowing their minds about, as he was moving his hand saying that's not really happening, that didn't happen. And it was basically what we're seeing here is that
Yeah.
in order for us to comprehend with our thinking mind, we have to see the sequence and time, which sequence and time are basically the same thing, one thing happening after another, rather than everything actually happening all at once and together.
Mhm.
Still working on comprehending the divided pairs of oppositely conditioned light pressures.
Well, if we look at the actual wave diagram here, and we've had some discussions on this, is that if we actually, you know, put these, if we took this and flipped it up, right, we'd actually, these would come together. I'm not getting my pen here. I can try to draw with my mouse, it's not the best. And then we get, you know, the wave happening, right? So we get to yin yang if we take this side and flip it up this way. So the two lights, as we've talked about in the past, right? One side light, one side dark.
Yeah.
We'll just say this is the dark side, right? This is the light side. We get the yin yang and we get creation.
It's, I know it's an imperfect, well, the analogy to just something simple that we can comprehend like audio seems like at least worth digging into and understanding the relationships and whether that's like a, you know, whether that's missing part of the equation or whether that's something that's like a, you know, a 1D version of this like a multi-dimensional thing. But sometimes it's easy to kind of break it down. So like with audio, you've got a waveform, and if you only had one side, the, you know, the positive quality, then no sound would ever come out of the speaker because the speaker wouldn't vibrate. The thing that you can measure maybe is the output, the sound itself, but it doesn't exist without the positive and negative vibrations of the speaker. Is that like, that's basically the same kind of concept, but this is, I think, right? Although when you talk about overlaying the yin yang, the additional waveform onto here, I feel like I get a little confused. So is that analogy essentially a simplification of this, or is that missing part of this conversation?
I think the simplification is that when we see this, we see it as a continuous line, you know, starting at the top and up here, you know, up here, and following down through the 0 point, and then, you know, ending here, right? But as we know that time and sequence is an illusion, correct? That it's not really happening in a line like this. This is what we need to actually comprehend it in our thinking mind. What's really happening is that this wave is returning back, right, over here. And this is all happening at one time. And within that, we have the wave coming through the center here. And we have the dark side, you know, whatever you want to call it, positive, negative, right? And we have the light side over here. So the yin yang is really, that's, I think we were talking in the telegram, you know, was really the symbol. And then when you take that and you flip it into 3D, and then you know, flip it into 4D and so on and so forth, you actually begin to see the toroidal field that's going on, which is all things happening at one time. This is more like a 2D this is actually like a line diagram compared to an actual even, drawing that it would have depth and height. It's more just a single line diagram.
But the example you use with the speakers and the sound kind of goes with that set. It says pressure in that sentence. So I'm thinking what you're doing is like that pressure that it talks about. Light pressure.
Yeah, so it's a pressure that's so if we're talking about the pressures that Walter describes, he describes one as being centripetal, which from without spirals within. So that would be the compression of suns in our solar system or in our universe. And then at the same time as that's happening, there's a radial expansion of that same pressure. So suns are compressed inwardly, and then they'll radiate outwardly into space. So from space, they'll compress, and from that compression, there'll be a radial expansion back into space. And the reason that suns are, he describes suns are always compressed into spheres, and once they radiate, they expand into cubes of space. Now, I don't know if that's literal or if he's just describing the field of the wave from which this is happening. So this is something that I still kind of try and wrap my head around, because he describes it as the cubic wave field. So yeah, there's a lot to kind of try and break down when he describes these two pressure conditions, because it's hard to comprehend that there's these two things happening, but they're not really comprehensible, if that makes sense. It's not something that you can draw. He obviously draws them in a
Well, you almost saw
analogous
it
sense
in one of those in that video that was shared, because the way that the three-dimensional slice through the toroidal yin yang, if you rotate it to a certain position, it actually rotates into the position of a perfect square, just at one moment in the projection, and then it goes back. Yeah. So
that's a good point.
I was wondering, when I saw that, I was wondering whether that's what he meant. Although I haven't looked it up again, but I remember some time back looking at some of the diagrams, and the distinction was that in the diagrams, the cube was containing the sphere, whereas in that particular example, it was contained by the sphere. But maybe there's something there. I don't know.
It's interesting, yeah, for sure.
So now I've just kind of drawn a circle, tried doing it with my mouse around, making this be the center point. And again, you see the yin yang, right? With the wave down the center being.
You're calling out this like how it's self-similarity. You can kind of go in or you can go out.
There's a good another image that I saw, which was good, of the yin and yang, which basically, if you're looking at that diagram, shows that, but down the center there's like yin yangs within each other, like this sort of fractal yin yang that just divides straight down the middle. It's pretty cool. I was going to share it, and I don't know, I got sidetracked, but I'll try and find it and I'll share it, because it's pretty crazy.
That's different than what Will was just kind of illustrating.
Oh, look! It was exactly what Will's trying to illustrate.
Yeah.
That you have the yin and yang in the whole, but within the whole, there's also infinite yin yang symbols that can be drawn within it.
I put a link to maybe a higher res version of this diagram if anybody wants to poke at it. And actually, there's an incredible wikischool.org/divided light. I'll just put that in there. I'm not reading it now, but it's like this huge.
Are you putting it in the Discord or?
You put it in the chat.
I'll put it in the chat for now.
Okay.
Maybe somebody can share it to the.
Let's-
I don't know what this site is, Wikischool, but this divided light is quite interesting. And a lot of references of Walter Russell. I didn't get a sense whether this is all Walter Russell, but
Mm-hmm. You know,
check it
I
out.
have some diagrams in here also from that I don't
Okay.
know if they were all Walter Russell or not either.
Mhm, mhm.
I mean, not from his diagrams, or they were just better, you know.
Mhm.
I'm having a hard time finding my chat.
So the chat, the picture that you have there, Will, is just a bigger to look at. That's all. Yeah. But it's good to have. Maybe you can post that on the Telegram later, right, Jeremy? It's a nice diagram.
yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just saying.
Yeah, I can post it. Sure.
Yeah. Well, gotta be good to, keep all that. It's so good.
So let's move on here to chapter 3. And what is a spiritual awareness of being? From page 22, we got consciousness. God is consciousness. Consciousness is static. So for that one, I have this little diagram, which I don't think is a Walter Russell, but it's from philosophy.org, which shows the red and the blue with the static in the middle.
The static being the fulcrum, right?
Correct. So does anyone have anything to talk about? You know, we've seen the void that we've talked about in some of the pictures, just the center being empty, being stillness. Does anyone have anything to talk about? The consciousness is God's consciousness. God is consciousness. So what is the spiritual awareness of being? I think, therefore I am, or I am aware, therefore I am.
The second part. I am aware. I think Dr. Barr said it today. He said to be aware. We gotta be aware at all times, basically, when we're out there. But, sorry, I'm thinking.
Susan, do you want to chime in at all?
Sorry, I've been munching as well, so I keep
Hey.
muted. I don't know if there's an if or with that question. I think it could go both ways, but what you were saying about I think therefore I am, or I'm aware therefore I am. It's almost like it's both in one, you know.
Do you think we have to think to be aware?
No.
Anybody else on that question? All right, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, looking at the, if you go back to the diagram there, please, William.
Okay, hold on a second.
Of the magnet.
We're not seeing you, Yannick, just so you know.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was moving my phone
Okay.
around, so everybody probably gets seasick. I'm just
Oh,
trying to find
no
that
problem.
image. So If we look at the magnet, there is no motion in the center of the magnet. All the motion happens on the outside of the magnet. So if you get iron filings, they will only happen on the ends of the magnet and not in the center. Just as a little, which is what you're seeing there, which you get this sense of this circular motion around the magnet. That was just a little piece I thought I should add in there.
And as you see, we have these opposite forces, opposing each other. And like these areas right here, you see that highlighted areas
Mm-hmm.
where you got them coming in and coming out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these are the equal opposed forces that we talked about.
It's almost an illusion as well, isn't it? Because there's only one direction ultimately. If you were to if you were to spin your finger in a circle, I mean, you might see it clockwise, looking at yourself spinning your finger around, but to the person on the other side of you, it will be anti-clockwise to them. But it's still one direction.
And I think Bear explained that is that we see, right? We don't see backwards, even though there is a trail and there is a past. But we only see in the future because we don't believe we can see in the past. So like you said, as you spin your finger, there is, but you're going into the future. The arrow that's going backwards, we don't see, which is the past. That's in our that's in our memory.
It's an interesting paradox.
Mm. Mm.
It kind of negates itself, doesn't it? It's like it's all happening at one time. That simple explanation just explains that everything is happening at once.
Mm-hmm. It's our eyes that deceive us, right?
Mm.
As that screen is projected in our minds, as from last week.
Yeah.
All right. So, question number 2, getting back to, is it consciousness or is it thinking, right? Do I think, therefore I am, or am I aware, therefore I am? What is thinking? From page 22, thinking is electric. God's thinking is expressed by two-way moving wave extensions from consciousness, like a lever swing from a fixed fulcrum. Like a lever swings from a fixed fulcrum. Any comments on that?
He introduces something else new there. He used the word extension. Extension from the fulcrum, I guess. What was this again? Well, it says from the consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So first there's consciousness.
Yep.
And then there's thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm conscious, therefore I think.
Mm-hmm.
You're smiling, Yannick.
Oh yeah, because it makes complete sense to me what you're saying and what he's saying. It's so difficult to articulate that any more than what's being said, if that makes sense. Try and simplify that even further is quite difficult. But I understand, I can comprehend it in my knowing, if that makes sense.
So the fixed fulcrum, right, is consciousness, right? Because that's what we're extending. That's where we're extending from.
Okay, fixed fulcrum right there. Okay.
Mm.
When we go back to the magnet, say, right,
Yeah, it's unmovable.
we see the fixed fulcrum. And these things extending out and extending in also, but the thinking is extending out.
Mm.
So here
Yeah,
we
if
have
you look at the S, Giselle, sorry, carry on.
Go ahead. Do you want to talk about the other
Oh, I
diagram?
was was talking about the magnet diagram. Just so Giselle can get a visual. If you look at where it says S, that's the fulcrum right there in the magnet. You see how it's got a little circle around it. So that's the point of stillness, and the two extensions are those two north poles of the magnet. So those are the extensions from which he kind of refers to on an analogous level, basically. That's kind of how I see it.
And this is just kind of a 3D drawing of that same thing, showing the vortices. The one end is a zero fulcrum, which projects dimensions, mind imagined patterns and pairs of bodies. And the other end is the enlarged pattern in motion.
In the shape of a cone.
So here's a conical shape here, right?
Yeah, okay.
And here's one, and they go in both directions. Kind of as you remember in my video with the biological ionization.
Mm-hmm. Well, you flipped it around in the other one. This one is, like when you're talking about a person's body, it was flipped. Mm-hmm.
See, and again, you know, the terms that are used here are charge and discharge, not positive and negative.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Jeremy, do you have anything?
Was think not about this diagram per se, but the same kind of thing. And thinking back to the original one that you showed, I was noticing recently the one before, or yeah, this, I was thinking about breath, and well, two things. One is it's interesting that the stillness. If I'm understanding this right, the stillness happens at the peaks in a way, and yet we're talking in this conversation about the stillness being the voided fulcrum in the middle. So in some ways like if you think about breath, when you go to the top of your breath, there's a pause and a stillness, and then you go down into exhalation, and then you pause again at the bottom of the breath and then come back up. But it's interesting because that transition point in looking at this is actually the period of it's the place of the most movement. It's the most transition because you're moving from positive to negative, but it's also the point of stillness. And I think so I was thinking about that when we were looking at the red blue diagram in a moment, and it has me a little stumped. I don't know if that came through, at least where I'm puzzled by. Did that make sense?
If you do look at the diagram, you see that within the diagram you have, you know, radiation dominates here, correct? That's what it says.
Yeah.
And then you have gravitation dominates here. And then we might say that we have the fulcrum right here, right?
Right.
You have the same thing here, is that you have this fulcrum between gravitation dominates and radiation. So this diagram is really, can be looked at either in this up here level or within this level, right? Or within this level. At any 3 points, the fulcrum is happening at the change between radiation and gravitation. And we're gonna, I think maybe later he talks a bit about how breathing in is gravitation and is life, and breathing out is radiation or death. And in the middle is the stillness. And what I found is when I do my Wim Hof and I hold my breath. So if breathing in is life and breathing out is death, what is it when I do neither but hold my breath? Is that the fulcrum? Is that the God-centeredness? Because I know that if you want to get present, you want to become aware, hold your breath.
Mhm.
The only thing you're thinking about is now. You're watching because when I do it, I have a stopwatch on, right? You're watching every second.
Mm.
And what I have, and when I do my Wim Hof, I kind of combine a lot of different methods. I combine Mantek Chias, circulating the chi. I combine a lot of I am statements. I am omnipresent. I'm all powerful. I'm all knowing. I'm everywhere. As I'm holding my breath, because when you do the Wim Hof method, you try to hold your breath for as long as you can. I'm somewhere around 2.5 to 3 minutes. The closer I get to the 3 minutes, when you don't let that breath out at 3 minutes, you actually breathe in another breath, and then you try to hold that for 15 seconds. And when I hold that second breath for 15 seconds, that is where you really get centered on awareness and centered on God and on that stillness, for me anyway.
Mm.
That makes total sense. That it would be the holding of the breath would be the fulcrum.
Maybe the thing that I'm talking about too also brings into the fact that there's simultaneity in the direction, and that's how you could think of the maximum at one being the stillness of the other. Interesting. Anyway, I'll think on that some more. I'd like to try that Wim Hof.
I may do a video on how I do it because I think it is kind of interesting.
I've heard of it a lot. I don't know anything about it though.
Yeah,
He's the cold plunge guy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Then you get into cold water and other things. It's very powerful.
I hadn't heard that aspect of kind of finding stillness and consciousness in there. I didn't realize that was part of what he was working.
Well, he's not. That's kind of my own spin on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
As I've done it and as I'm reading this,
Uh-huh.
that's what I'm becoming aware of.
Interesting. Yeah.
In an indirect way, though, because his method, I mean, in an indirect way, because you do get to that point where all the other extrasensory things are gone, so that when you do take that ice plunge, that you're just in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of in an indirect way, I'd say.
I mean, he does stress being in the moment. When you listen to him, he'll say, "We're in the moment." So it's pretty fun. So everybody good with question 2? Ready to move on to question 3?
Yeah.
Okay, question 3. What is sensation? The electrical awareness of motion simulating the spiritual qualities of the one idea by creating imagined quantities of separate forms which seem to have substance. So there's some things we're speaking about here: spiritual qualities, imagined quantities, and separate forms that seem to have substance, or what we call matter. So let's go back to maybe this diagram here, right? Which shows the oneness of the mind with the qualities here in the center, right? Which moves out to sensation, which moves out to the body or matter.
There was something about the way that you phrased that answer too that makes me think of the kind of not entanglement so much, but the kind of tightening, the closeness of those lines is by creating imagined quantities of separate forms, and implying that like I don't know, I imagine like the multiple of these qualities come together.
The countless octave wave units
Yeah.
of light pressures, right? So as these pressures tighten up.
Countless is good to reinforce, because often I'm trying to simplify this so much in my mind, and it's so distant from the complexity that really has to manifest to get to our state of perception. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm just I need to drop that.
I think that's what we do, isn't it? We overcomplicate
Yeah.
this when nature is so simplex in reality. But we just, with our conditioning, we try and create elaborate ways of trying to explain it.
This is really nice, bringing all these diagrams in. I have to say, it's very helpful.
Well, it was tough for me to actually try to understand what he was saying and trying to find the right diagram too. I'm not saying I'm always getting the right one, but I'm trying to get the ones that I think work the best.
That was what initially drew me to him, that I saw a handful of his diagrams, and just almost like intuitively, I knew that this is what I wanted to, that there was this truth in what he was saying. I couldn't even understand them all. I just knew, and I got so fascinated by him. And yet I realized that I have been all of the reading and that I've been doing has been in absence of these diagrams. And so it's really so nice to return to them.
And that's, I think, and maybe, people had a much more imaginative mind when he wrote the book and actually had better comprehension. But he puts all his diagrams and explanations at the end of the book.
Right. Yeah.
And I think if he would have actually incorporated some of these diagrams, as in the book, as he was explaining, it may have been. And that's, hopefully what we're doing here. Because I know that when I try to find his information on him, a lot of people read the book, they read it online, but no one really gets into kind of putting it all together and discussing it. So hopefully this will help a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying this.
We've just got to look at it from what we do day to day, and mind precedes everything. all bodies, all shapes, even from in a human being perspective of creating something. You know, first comes an idea, and you think on it, and then you put it into action. So it's always that idea that comes first, which is mind, or part of those. If we look at that other diagram of all those different things of imagination and love, and all these things are kind of part of the one, but they're not manifest into anything of substance. But it's our antennae that pick up on these things that are just already in and around us, and we pick up on those things like a tuning fork or a radio frequency, and then we then put that stuff into action. So it's kind of, there's an order to things: mind, thinking, action. It's never the other way around. You cannot know from the action of the steps before it, if you know what I mean. Probably not making much sense in that part, but it's like trying to understand one cell in your body and trying to create a whole picture of the entire body.
I think that one thing that's kind of cool about this drawing, though, I don't know if you guys can see this, but these things over here on the side, right? These are like if you were to cut this area right here, like for an architect. So this is the section of that area.
Mm-hmm.
So this circle would be like looking down if you were to take a knife and cut right through here. This is what it would look like over here. And so you can see that this is the area of gravity and that it's slow, and it gets faster and faster as we move down, or slower and slower as we moved up.
Do you know what's really interesting? Because you know the stuff that Ken Wheeler does with the ferrocell. He explains this as well. He says that when you have a magnet that's not that powerful, the field is larger, but the center, so where there's nothing happening, or mind, if you want to call it, is a smaller circle. But as the magnet becomes more powerful, the field shrinks down, but the hole in the middle gets larger. And if you look at sort of near the bottom there, you'll see that the ring is tight, but the hole is larger than
down
it's
here.
hard to explain, yeah, in sort of relation to the others, if you understand what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to watch Ken Wheeler's stuff with the ferrocell, because he does show that and explain that or illustrates that with the ferrocell, that as the magnet becomes more powerful, that eye in the middle becomes larger, so there's more pull or seeming pull towards that object, rather than it being a smaller, less powerful magnet where there's a seemingly larger field but less what we call magnetism, or the mainstream call magnetism. So that's an interesting that he came up with that before we had ferrocells and that kind of thing.
Do you think it relates to what Dr. Lando said in the Alpha Cast today about our electronic body creates a tube? He talked about the masters, somebody who's a master, or they create like a tube, a field that nothing can penetrate. So if you're out there,
Mm-hmm.
nothing can touch you, that kind of thing.
Well, if you look at this diagram, you do see it says the axis of mind shift going down the middle here. And then maybe these toroidal fields on the outside actually are what are creating that tube.
Tube of light, he said.
But not shift, it's actually shaft, mind shaft.
Yeah, mine shaft. So he was talking about the mine shaft that was running down through the middle of us.
And it
Yeah.
protects.
That's the fulcrum. There's
Yeah,
no
because
motion there.
So when you see that
Sorry,
toroidal
Susan.
field, you have that, in the center of both torids, you have that hole, that shaft going down the middle.
And I think when you were describing, well, I guess the fulcrum of the center, yeah, like as we're more centered, we will radiate. Well, he talked about that he would, when he was seeing clients, like at the beginning of his career, just learning not to get sick or something, you can imagine this, I guess this protection field or something. I was told that by a homeopath as well, how she started in her work. So anyways, I just think when we're more centered, when we're out there and we're aware, as he described today, we are more protected and we won't be touched by these, well, waves, the waves that are being transmitted right now that people talk about. Anyway.
Yeah. When we are more centered, we are more balanced. When we are more balanced, we are less chaotic. It's the chaos that creates the holes.
Oh yeah, he talked about holes today. He did mention.
And oftentimes when you have an image of your aura done, you can actually see the holes in the aura. And those are the areas usually where people have disease or have issues. And so I think you're on something very correct, is that the more centered we become, the more balanced we become, the less chaotic we become, and the stronger our resonance to create the auric fields that protect us. Because the auric fields display in octaves of light, just as Bear was talking about today. And those can be seen as those octaves around us.
It's
Does it-
interesting to talk about the aura. Giselle knows Lucy, my partner. She does biofield tuning, so she's always working in the, I guess you call it the aura if you want, or it's called the biofield. So when she works with tuning forks, she comes across densities in the field, and as you're talking about the holes in the aura, just kind of made me think of that.
Yeah, I work with tuning forks also, and I have comb fields, and
oh, there you go.
It's an amazing thing when you actually hit a density or the change in the fork. The tone of the fork can just scream sometimes, and the way that Eileen McCusick explains it, if it's despair, right, it'll actually lower the tone, and if it becomes shrill, then it's fear.
That's right. Yeah.
As you comb through somebody's field, and you start out at about 6 feet or so, and the farther out, the younger the age. So the older you are, your field's about the same. It just becomes more dense. So, if you're 60, the edge of your field, you're 60. If you're 18, it's 18. So your field doesn't grow as you get older. It just becomes more dense.
Or like the rings of a tree, like she describes.
The rings of the tree.
Yeah, as you do a cross section of the tree, you'll get the rings. It's kind of like that. The outer edge is the oldest, and as you get closer to the body, that's where the new information is stored.
Like the Akashic record.
I wanted not to go too off track on this, but maybe a quick question. So the biogeometry and some of these other techniques you're talking about now sound like a way to measure quantitatively something, like they're tools to transform unmeasurable quality into into a measurable quantity. I mean, that's how I'm hearing it. I don't know if
Well,
I'm understanding it right, but
biogeometry actually measures quality.
right. But I was understanding that quality is an unmeasurable. And so how do these tools work that can take quality and turn it into something that we can measure with our senses?
Well, we're actually identifying it with our senses. We're not measuring it with our senses. The tools that we use in biogeometry pick up waveforms, which our senses can't measure. And if you watch Bear, and I think if you watch the video that Giselle put out with Dr. Kareem, did you put that one out on Tuesday, Giselle? I think you did, didn't you? Where Dr. Kareem spoke.
I didn't watch
there.
it, but I saw the yeah, I'd like to watch it.
He shows the Waj pendulum, which comes from Egypt, which has different shapes and forms on it. And each of those shapes and form resonate with a plane of existence. So say the sphere is like the physical plane, like the earth. So I don't know about flat earthers, but for some reason, the sphere does resonate with, the hemisphere works with the vital body, there's different shapes, kind of a disc is the mental plane. And these are all put together within that Waj pendulum. And as you hang that pendulum, those different forms and shapes pick up on the qualities. Now, there's both pendulums that, as you get into biogeometry, that you can buy from Dr. Kareem, which you can only buy if you do take the classes, can actually register color. And they go through the spectrum of color. And the horizontal pendulum, I believe it's a horizontal, I'll make sure I get this right. The horizontal measures waves that are beneficial. And the vertical measures waves that are detrimental.
Mm-hmm.
And they measure the same colors, but a negative wave of, say, of infrared would be harmful, to where a horizontal wave of infrared would be beneficial. So you're measuring the qualities not from your senses, but from the forms they resonate with.
I think what you're just describing, I think might be in the lecture of Dr. Gilbert, because I watched Dr. Karim. He didn't show any kind of diagram, like any pendulum or anything. So it must be the one from Australia there, the Australian.
It was Gilbert, now that I'm thinking about it.
No, it's Dr. Gilbert. Yeah, I haven't watched that one yet. I haven't had a chance, but I'm sure he covered pendulum and how he measures things, because I've seen a few of his videos. So, but it's in that one, Dr. Gilbert. Yeah.
And I don't know if you're really measuring, because you measure quantity, you're identifying quality.
Yeah. Identifying, I guess that's better.
To do the introduction, my wife is doing the biogeometry course. And
Yeah.
I tried to do the very introductory.
Neutral pendulum.
Well, I don't even know what I haven't really read it. She was just trying to take me through the experiment where you try it on a battery.
Yeah, it probably was a neutral pendulum. It's a round pendulum, clear round.
I couldn't do it. I don't know. I'm gonna keep trying. It's fascinating. But
I got one of the Terran pendulum here. And I haven't taken any course, but I took it around the place, and you're not to put your intention in it. And let me tell you, depending where I put it, like when I put it on that indigo Gabra, like it moved, like I didn't have to do anything. It just went, but as soon as I'm just saying it was interesting. I just thought, geez, I need to take some courses. Would be really neat to know Yeah, anyway.
And that's one thing that I think Dr. Gilbert got into was the difference between mental dowsing and
The the dowsers that always,
and-
like the Tauxon dowsers, those people we saw.
and that's what can happen is that you can get your thinking mind and your mental dowsing
Yeah.
connected with the pendulum, and you're not picking up the energy signatures.
I'm sure that's what I'm doing.
I was going to say that before. I said maybe too much mind, but
Oh, that's my problem for sure.
You gotta clear it out. Let it do its thing.
And that happens with even with the tuning forks. They say that you have to actually go into a state of hollow bone, which is a state of like 0 point. Otherwise, you will affect the tuning forks also.
Well, the one thing that I got, and I didn't really so much get the pendulum to work, but as I got into it, I guess I got a little bit entranced by some of the light, the way that the light was refracted through the pendulum against the objects that were on the table behind it, and it felt like I was feeling something, and yet it was almost, I mean, maybe my brain, maybe my thinking mind kept coming in, but I felt like it was there was something about the way that the acceleration of the light through the refraction was like tricking me into feeling something. So I don't know whether anyway, I was clearly overthinking things, but it was still an interesting moment. I'm gonna try more. I'll report back.
The more you do it, the easier it becomes.
Okay.
All right. Any more comments on the last question? The spiritual qualities of one idea, the spiritual qualities of one idea by creating imagined quantities of separate forms which seem to have substance. So this gets back to, our screen that we see, which is not real, and we imagine mass, we imagine matter. All right. Question number 4. Where does all imagining come from? Page 24. All imagining is God's imagining. All forms are the electric recording of God's imagining and have no existence. All forms are the electric recording and have no existence. Any comments on that?
I just imagine the universe like a big hard drive, really. It's only recording information from the thinking mind of God. That's kind of the analogy I like to use.
I think Walter actually compares it to a phonograph record, right? Whereas the needle goes around the voice, right? It's replicated, but it's nowhere. It's a reproduction of the wave. The singer's gone. The one who created is gone, right? He's not there.
Yeah, true. And even if you look at the record itself, the record contains all information. It's just where you place the needle.
For the intention.
Yeah.
And yet, a record is fixed in its form. I mean, depending on how deep you want to go into the manifestation of a record. And yet, what we're talking about more, believe, is that our thoughts change the record as we go? I'm not quite sure how to, like, it's not predetermined.
It's that as the mind records, so does the vinyl of the record. The needle is our thinking mind, which pulls that into being from our memories. It's not being, it is not something that's happening now. It's not real, right? That man's not singing. It's on the record, or woman, or whatever we're hearing.
So it's like we were pressing the record as we were listening to it.
Mm-hmm. Our thinking mind goes into it and creates it back to a memory.
At the same time, all idea has always been and always will be, if that makes sense. It's just our ability to extract it at any one time, as you say, as you describe, where you place the needle.
Mm-hmm.
So the record is imagine, not that you can imagine this, but it's the record has every single idea that could possibly be. And depending on where you place that needle, or where that focus is placed, that information or idea will be available to us and can be printed into this realm, essentially.
What we perceive as matter, but is not real.
Mm.
But as we hear this, the sound or what we pick to choose on that record, for example, that we're giving that example, I think we grow, like in consciousness, we grow, or we understand more. I don't know. I'm just, there's a reason why, even if it doesn't exist, there's a reason why we chose to pick that over this, you know what I mean? As we're progressing in life, or, coming back to the idea, which was from previous, one idea. So anyway, even if it's simulation or imagining, I think it's important. But anyway, it says sensation and consciousness. That's the whole chapter, right? I got to focus on that.
And I guess the question would be, since God or source is not physical, he's only mind and still, does he need us to have sensation? As we talked about, I think it was last week, how we were kind of the elements that go out into the physical to sense. And as we feel these, we bring them back to God, even though they're not real. So these sensations that we have, we're communicating back to the source. So we're like a probe,
Mm.
a skin probe.
And like from that picture you had with all the qualities, we can radiate love and all those qualities, I guess.
As you see this picture, again, as we get farther out, right, we begin to build the body or the matter.
Yeah, the more compressed it becomes, and then the closer you get to mind, the more it unwinds and ceases.
Into the one,
Mm.
rather than the many. Divided lights, light, and octaves.
I mean, you can liken it to a dream, Giselle. It's when you have a dream, Nothing about it is real. And could we say that we are the dreams of the undivided one?
Mhm.
I think it was Steiner who said that early man, or man of the past, believed that the dreams were real life and that the waking life was the dream.
I mean, yeah, some people probably do feel like that.
All right, let's see here. So,
I gotta just jump. I gotta say goodbye. I think I gotta jump back to family. But
Okay.
this,
I'm going
It's
to
nice.
also jump out of the call. So it was good to see everybody.
okay, would you want to
Good
stop here?
talking.
Maybe we should. What time is it? Oh my God. I mean,
Okay,
think
so,
we're
oh, hey,
almost-
Susan, good to
Hi.
see you.
I'm
So,
on my tablet and I'm always.
okay, I'll drop. But whatever you guys choose to do is good. with me.
I think we'll go ahead and stop here.
Jeremy.
Yeah. Hi,
See you,
Jeremy.
Jeremy.
All right.
Hi.
So we'll stop at question 5.
Yes, it's good.
And we'll pick up. Hopefully everyone enjoyed this discussion. I enjoyed everybody being here. Thank you so much. And I was going to actually, so we're going to go ahead and finish these up. And next week, I was going to cover these cosmic conscious, because these are all like 1 or 2 pages a piece. I mean, it's only 13 pages, but they kind of should be done in a cluster, I think. But if not, that's fine. But I'm going to go ahead and create questions for the cosmic consciousness, creative expression, knowledge versus thinking, and thinking versus sensing.
Cool. Sounds good.
Okay.
Good. Amazing.
Cool. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Good to see you. I'll catch you later.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks,
Bye.
William.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.